What's going on? Well, thanks for tuning in once again. Let's talk Stevenson versus Lopez. Fight recap. A lot of people was not expecting such a dominant performance, from Stevenson, including myself. I was saying that let's take in mind that, Stevenson is going up in weight. You never know what he can handle. But, this just proves that this guy's just too good. I also mentioned that he can go up. He's that good defensively, and that's what we saw. His defense is too good. His counter punchability, The problem that I saw in this fight was that Lopez just couldn't initiate his attack. Similar to the Spence versus Crawford, where Spence, he couldn't initiate that jab. Crawford just kept shutting down the jab. And, he just didn't look like he was, there in the fight. He just didn't have a game plan. In Teofimo's case, he just couldn't change, the fight. He couldn't change the fight up. He just kept walking into that jab. He just couldn't hurt Stevenson. And, I was saying that he should target the body, or at least go for the body shots, try to cut him off the ring and try to get him on the ropes like Zapata did. He backed him up a couple of times and then go for the body, especially the first half of the fight. Everyone knew that Stevenson was going to outbox this guy, or most people knew. Stevenson is just a good pot shotter. He's just that good defensively, but we didn't know if Stevenson could handle the power at 140. And Stevenson, he was more front-footed than Lopez in this fight. Although he was working with space like he usually does, he just kept landing that jab. He just kept beating him to the punch, landing those hooks. Lopez did have a successful round 8, but that was about it. In that round 8, I was saying during the fight, it's too late. It's too late. He needed to really win this fight by stoppage, as I mentioned in the breakdown. The only way that Lopez wins is by stoppage or knocking him down a couple of times. The only person that looked like he was going to get stopped was Lopez. The only person that looked that he came close to a knockdown was Lopez. Stevenson was the guy that was in control of this fight. Just far too dominant, far too quick, too sharp for Lopez. Like I said, I just think Lopez couldn't initiate any attack. He didn't know what to do really, because Stevenson kept shutting him down. Stevenson's whole game was just to shoot that jab out, beat him to the punch, counter punch him, and just take control of the fight. And that's what he did from the start to the end. It would have been good to see a stoppage, but the damage to Stevenson's face after the fight, to Lopez's face after the fight, was jaw-dropping. He looked like he was in a 15-round fight, Rocky against Apollo Creed. He just looked banged up, didn't he? He just looked like he was, really taking punishment. Where Stevenson's face is as clear as day. If you're watching the end of the fight and you missed the whole fight, you can just tell who won by seeing their faces. It would have been good to see a stoppage from Stevenson. I think that he could have got a stoppage, but he's, like I mentioned, he likes to work with space. Coming into this fight, I was saying Teofimo didn't have a stoppage for, at least 4 years. At least 4 years, he hasn't had a stoppage, so I wasn't expecting him to stop Stevenson, but I was expecting him to really go for it and try to at least knock him down. So it was going to be a hard fight for Lopez regardless, but Lopez was the champion and Lopez was the guy at 140, so I thought with those advantages, Stevenson moving up in weight to 140, I thought it'll be a much closer fight, but I was not expecting such a dominant, one-sided beatdown. Just when I say beatdown, I mean, Teofimo just couldn't, close the gap. He just couldn't hurt Stevenson, except for that round 8, but one round isn't going to do it against Stevenson. You've got to break him down. I was saying Lopez needs to break him down in the first 6 rounds. I know he wasn't going to win those rounds, but at least try to hurt him to the body, try to slow him down a bit, but and then try to take over in the second half. That was my breakdown before the fight. There was no way that he was going to win on points. I just knew that Stevenson was the better boxer. But like I said, Stevenson going up in weight, who knows what sort of power he can take. But obviously Lopez couldn't question that, and a lot of people can't because Stevenson's that good defensively. But that's my take anyway. I thought that Stevenson was just too sharp and more front-footed as well than Lopez, and I think that he could have got him out of there. If anything, moving forward, I'd like to see Stevenson finish the job off, like in terms of going for the finish, knockout. I know that he doesn't need to, but just in terms of entertaining wise, more entertainment, more money for value, you could say, just to entertain the crowd more. But other than that, look at the guy's face. You could just see that Stevenson's punches were effective, and he got the job done easily, you could say. I thought it looked easy anyway. Lopez just had no direction, no initiation of attack, and Stevenson was just picking him apart with the jab, just too sharp. But I think that Stevenson will go up in weight, as I mentioned as well. He's that good that he can just go up in weight. Look, it doesn't even look like the guy got hurt that much. Leave your take anyway, and I'll catch you next time. Peace.